Hitting with the point is the best and only way to do it with a thrust, particularly a very linear thrust and a big bend? Or are there ways that we can do it other than that that actually help with safety? Let's talk about options today. Jeff Tsai, Forte Swordplay. So there's been various recent conversations about thrusts, being safe with the thrust, how do we avoid injury? These are really great conversations that we should constantly be revisiting. And today, I think there's been a lot of conversation recently about protective gear and making sure that we've got good standards. That is definitely a conversation that we should all be having in the HEMA community. What I want to do today is actually talk really more broadly about, how are we making sure that we're doing everything we can for safety, and that includes certainly the protective gear, but also how we deliver thrusts. How do we deliver actually hitting with the point? There's at least those two pieces, and I want to make sure that the technical part, dealing with technique, does not get lost in the conversation with protective gear. So if we focus on technique, when we look at a lot of modern HEMA tournaments, one of the things that I feel is usually sort of typically expected or assumed as a gold standard for actually striking an opponent and demonstrating that you've gotten them beat is landing with the point, and not just landing with the point, but actually with this really big noticeable bend. And I think it's one of those questions that is maybe worth asking: where's that coming from, right? And this is my opinion, but I think where a lot of that comes from is modern Olympic fencing. The weapons that are used for modern Olympic fencing are really designed for that kind of, stick them, have really good linear structure behind it, and deliver it with that good bend. And both the protective gear and the weapons are designed for that kind of force. In comparison, if you think about the historical aspect, we know that weapons back in the day, there were weapons that did in fact have flex, that were these so-called faders back in the day, used for instance in the German tradition. There are not many that survive, and so I think number one, we got to be really careful drawing conclusions about what these weapons were like or even how they were used based on just a few surviving examples. But again, we can at least confirm there's existence, right? So there's an existence of weapons back in the day that did have flex, that were basically longsword type weapons. However, going from that to thinking that, okay, these are actually designed so that I'm going to hit with the point, drive it in, and get this flex, I think there's actually strong evidence that suggests that's not what they were intended for. Couple of things. When you read Joachim Meyer, he explicitly says that when they're doing their competition stuff, just legally, thrusts were not allowed, right? So they're definitely not doing things where actually we're trying to actually hit with the point, let alone actually let this actually bend. However, we also know from what he's describing that there are things where we do see a bend. There are illustrations of this, but we'll see that there are things that he calls flicks, right? So it's really much less of a linear action and much more of a flick coming out of a more cutting, rotational driven action. So what does that mean? What I'm suggesting is, instead of always looking at these linear actions in order to take advantage of certainly the bend in the blade, but also just safety, instead of always doing this kind of action, we can actually start incorporating things which are a little bit more dealing with rotation, dealing with more of the sort of rotation behind cuts. So rather than this, these kinds of actions, right? And so you might an obvious question might be like, why do it that way? Why even bother doing it? Like, this is just shorter, right? It's just faster. Something that might help sort of motivate that is in the German tradition, we have plow, and then sort of mirror image on top, we've got Ochs, right? And again, from here, yeah, you can do these linear thrusts. I will tell you, they're a little awkward, honestly, right? Like trying to do a thrust this way, you can do it, but it doesn't really flow very well. However, when you're an ox, doing these kinds of motions, these sort of like more plunge, curved, rotational motions, actually very natural. If you think about the whole idea of a moulinet, right? That's basically that plunging sort of ox kind of motion. And when you think about that, and then you also think about the German tradition talking about how every attack can be done as a something with the point, something with the edge, something with the flat, or a thrust or a cut or a slice. You start seeing that if you're doing this kind of a motion, then it's really more of like where am I relative to the opponent? If I'm furthest distance, then hitting with the point is kind of what naturally happens. If I'm a little closer, then that turns into something hitting with the short edge. And then if I'm really, really close and deep, like I might be doing something where I land and I'm actually using that pressure with the blade to do slicing and wrestling and all that kind of stuff. So all of a sudden, those three different outcomes are still built off of the same fundamental mechanic, something that is a lot less this and a lot more this. And so if you're okay with this, then this also can apply, right? So that's taking sort of inspiration from the tradition in terms of the thrust, cut, slice language from the Zettel, and looking at Meyer and the fact that he's doing things which are more sort of like cut based. Another bit from the historical tradition that I think is worth considering is actually the imagery. So if you go back, so we've had a couple things at the end of the tradition that we can kind of use to sort of like support that thinking, like Meyer's stuff. We can also go way back to the Stahremberg or von Danzig Festbuch, as well as the Goliath, actually, where they have these couple of pictures which look very, very similar, and they have this really interesting emphasis almost on this front shoulder in this odd position where it seems like it's almost being dislocated, right? So one of the tricky things about looking at that kind of material, that kind of data, is how do you interpret it? And so what I've always kind of struck me, well, what's kind of struck me about these is that a lot of these sort of exaggerated things are often, one way of looking at them is that they're trying to emphasize a certain dynamic which they just can't capture in these still images, right? So if you're trying to get the idea of some sort of motion, what I suspect might be happening is they're not doing this kind of thing, but if they're doing this, right, that rotation, right? So do a little bit of this, and maybe you can then sort of line that up against some of these pictures and just get a sense of like, okay, boom, right? This is the kind of thing that I'm actually trying to do, this kind of almost scooping kind of activity. And not only is that good as a sort of, tag hit, that Sekrur technique that Meyer talks about, like, these sort of tag hits, these light, like flicks and hits. But like, even if I make that or I don't make it, from here, I can then come and actually come up underneath and parry as part of that follow-up action as well. So all of those things being said, again, just food for thought. Like, one of the things about this channel is not necessarily saying that this and this kind of big bend is, something that we should stop doing, but rather that in addition to doing those things, it might be something that is worth thinking about both in your daily practice and even in competition where, you know, when we're doing something like this, for instance, we're not always, boom, trying to get this big bend, but actually, boom, this, boom. And like if we end up here, all of a sudden this allows us to be doing things where we can actually get into wrestling. And to the point of like competition and tournaments and judging in particular, I think there are times when people see stuff like this and they think, oh, they missed, right? And this is where I think getting people to start recognizing that actually, no, that's actually a legitimate hit with that short edge to here or to here, and not, you know, in modern Olympic fencing parlance, it's not passe, for instance. It's not that I've missed and I've gone past. That can actually be considered a legitimate hit. Although actually in these cases, the other thing that'll help make sure that people understand it's not a miss is to continue, you know, beyond, right? So don't just make that hit and just stay there, right? So, and I think that's the other thing coming back to this, where this is really sort of designed to be something where you stop, plant, demonstrate, right? So it becomes tricky if we're trying to introduce these other mechanics as valid ways to actually land a hit and score. Judges have to be able to kind of recognize that as something that is legitimate. And that can't happen unless people have a conversation like this and think about, okay, is the only way to actually land an attack with the point this planted linear blade curving activity, this action, or can it be something that which is a little bit more in the vein of these sort of like curved cutting kind of actions, where there's some sort of hit and there's content like continuation afterward. So there you go, food for thought. Everyone stay safe, and hopefully we keep looking at these other broader ways of executing techniques, and I think it'll help us better understand the stuff that was being written down in the day from the sources, which you're going to get more of on this channel, right? See you next time.